What happens when the beautiful game of soccer becomes a catalyst for war? In today's video, we'll dive into the extraordinary and tragic story of the Football War, a 4-day conflict in 1969 between Honduras and El Salvador. This war wasn't just about soccer. It was about deep-seated political, economic, and social tensions that erupted into violence. By the end of this video, you'll understand the intricate web of causes, the dramatic events that unfolded, and the lasting legacy of this conflict. Background: a region on the brink. To understand the Football War, we must first look at the situation in Central America in the 1960s. Both Honduras and El Salvador were struggling with poverty, political instability, and inequality. Honduras, the larger of the two nations by land, had a population of about 2.3 million people. Despite its size, the country had an underdeveloped economy, heavily reliant on agriculture, with large estates owned by a small elite class. Land reform was a hot-button issue, as millions of Hondurans lived in poverty with little or no access to farmland. El Salvador, on the other hand, was much smaller geographically, but had double the population, over 4.5 million people. The country's dense population placed enormous strain on its resources, prompting thousands of Salvadorans to migrate to Honduras in search of land and opportunity. By the late 1960s, more than 300,000 Salvadorans were living in Honduras. This influx of migrants led to rising tensions. Honduran citizens resented the Salvadoran settlers, whom they saw as competitors for jobs and land. These tensions escalated when the Honduran government passed land reforms in 1962, which aimed to redistribute land to native Hondurans, effectively displacing many Salvadoran families. The role of soccer. In 1969, the FIFA World Cup qualifiers paired Honduras and El Salvador against each other. The rivalry between the two nations played out not just on the soccer field, but also in the streets and political discourse. The first match, held in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, was a hard-fought game that ended in a 1-0 victory for Honduras. However, the Salvadoran players reported harassment and hostility from Honduran fans, including sleepless nights due to noise and disturbances outside their hotel. The second match in San Salvador flipped the script. The Salvadoran team triumphed 3-0, but the hostility intensified. Honduran players were met with a similarly hostile reception, and violence broke out between fans in the aftermath. The deciding match was held in Mexico City on neutral ground. El Salvador secured a narrow victory, qualifying for the next round of the World Cup. While the Salvadoran team celebrated, the tensions between the two nations reached a boiling point. War breaks out. The soccer matches acted as the spark that ignited a war fueled by years of unresolved issues. On July 14th, 1969, just weeks after the final soccer match, El Salvador launched a military offensive against Honduras. The Salvadoran government framed the invasion as an effort to protect Salvadorans living in Honduras, who were reportedly being attacked and displaced. Salvadoran forces advanced quickly, capturing towns and strategic locations near the border. Honduras, initially caught off guard, mobilized its military and launched retaliatory airstrikes. The fighting was intense but short-lived, as both sides faced logistical challenges that limited their capacity to sustain a prolonged conflict. The 4-day conflict. The war, often called the 100-hour war, lasted from July 14th to July 18th. Salvadoran forces initially gained ground, capturing key towns and threatening deeper incursions into Honduran territory. However, the Honduran Air Force struck back, targeting Salvadoran supply lines and infrastructure. Civilians bore the brunt of the violence. Thousands were displaced, and many lost their lives as the conflict raged on. Estimates suggest that over 2,000 people were killed during the brief war, with many more injured. International observers were shocked by the intensity of the conflict, especially given its seemingly trivial catalyst, a soccer match. However, as the fighting continued, it became clear that the war was about much more than soccer. International mediation and ceasefire. The Organization of American States, OAS, quickly intervened, calling for an immediate ceasefire and negotiations to end the hostilities. By July 18th, both sides agreed to a ceasefire, though tensions remained high. Salvadoran troops were ordered to withdraw from Honduran territory within 2 weeks, and hostilities formally ended. However, the ceasefire did little to address the root causes of the conflict. Salvadoran migrants continued to face persecution in Honduras, and diplomatic relations between the two nations remained severed for over a decade. Aftermath and consequences. Human cost. The war left thousands dead and displaced countless families. Refugees flooded into neighboring regions, creating a humanitarian crisis that further strained the resources of both nations. Economic fallout. The war devastated both economies. Trade routes were disrupted, and infrastructure was destroyed. For El Salvador, the conflict deepened the economic struggles that had already driven so many of its citizens to migrate. Honduras faced its own challenges, particularly in implementing land reforms without exacerbating tensions with Salvadoran settlers. Diplomatic strains. Relations between Honduras and El Salvador remained tense for years. It wasn't until 1980 that the two countries formally signed a peace treaty. Even then, lingering mistrust and resentment persisted. Soccer's role in society. The football war demonstrated the power of sports as both a unifying and divisive force. While soccer remains a beloved pastime in Central America, the events of 1969 serve as a stark reminder of how deeply national pride and identity are tied to the game. 7. Lessons from the football war. The football war teaches us important lessons about the dangers of unresolved tensions. While soccer acted as the immediate trigger, the underlying causes were far more complex, rooted in poverty, inequality, and nationalism. This conflict also highlights the role of international organizations, like the OAS, in mediating disputes and preventing further violence. However, it underscores the need for long-term solutions to address systemic issues, rather than simply treating the symptoms. The football war of 1969 is a fascinating and tragic chapter in world history. It's a story of how a soccer match became the flashpoint for a deeper conflict, and a reminder of the importance of addressing the root causes of tension between nations. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into history. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.